Do not ask me this question. We don't talk about this in public. Turn off the camera.
Hello, I am Vladimir. I am one of hosts of Towards Absurdity. Chota rubbish more. I am one of hosts of Towards Eternity, the show where we ask extremely hard questions for Muslim propagandists. Alhamdulillah.
How would we know that Christianity is wrong?
The Trinity doesn't make sense logically.
But in last episode, I barbecue big Islamophobe, Dr. David Wood, with a very difficult and challenging question.
So can you use Steelman, the most powerful Dawah argument?
Steelman, the most powerful Dawah argument? Yes, I can.
In this episode, I will humiliate him some more. But not only him. In my basement, I also have other Islamophobes, like Dr. J. Smith, Anthony Rogers, Thomas Apologia, Chris at Speaker's Corner, Ananda Apologetics, and Sig. Do you want to see the iron fist of Vladimir with hard-hitting questions fall upon these Christian apologists and polemicists? Then let's go.
Dr. J. Smith, we brought you here to ask you some very difficult questions.
We know, based upon archaeological evidence, that Mecca in the 7th century was a very big trading hub, full of people from all over the world. How do you respond to this?
This is a lie. Let me just ask you real quickly. What archaeological evidence? Show me one piece of archaeological evidence. Come on, we've been asking this now for at least 4 years. Nothing exists for a very good reason. Have you looked at a map? Have either of you two looked at a map? Take a look at a map and see where Mecca is. First of all, it's not on the plateau where all the trading places were. You have down here, you have Aden, you have Sana, you have Najran, you have Taif, you have Yathrib, you have Tabuk, you have Khaybar, and all the way up to Gaza. Where's Mecca there? It's not on the, not only is it not on the plateau, it's about 3,000 feet off. But take a look closely. There's no water there. If there's no water, no food, no people, no towns, no cities, no cities, no civilization, no history. Now come back to me with a better question than that.
Anthony Rogers. Many say the Bible is corrupt. We don't even know who wrote it. For example, who is John? This is not a Hebrew name. It's English. How do you respond to this very difficult objection?
You guys over there.
Yeah.
John is not an English name. That's the translation of his name from Hebrew into Greek into English. Yochanan is his name. It's a Hebrew name. It's one of the most common Hebrew names in the 1st century. It's well known.
So, Thomas, if the Trinity is one mind, does the Father know the proposition, I am the Son?
This is known as the famous problem of the indexicals, which was popularized by Jake, the Muslim metaphysician, and even people like the scary Mansour at Speaker's Corner. Now, the way that we actually understand this is that it's actually a flawed understanding of God's knowledge, which is both indexical and propositional. Now, an indexical is something whose linguistic expression can be changed based upon its referent. So, for example, when I say, I am hungry, it's really got the same content, the same universal content as saying Thomas Apologia is hungry. So because God's knowledge is neither indexical nor propositional, it does not mean that God thinks in propositions. In fact, historically, the Christian understanding of God's knowledge is that God has known himself in a perfect and simple eternal gaze. And thus, because God's object of knowledge is ultimately himself, his knowledge is not propositional, as the Muslims would like to put forth to us on this question. And thus, because his knowledge isn't propositional, it's nonsensical to ask the question, can the Father know, I am the Father, and the Son therefore not also know that?
Dr. David Wood, you are very big Islamophobe. So we brought you here to ask you some very difficult questions.
Everybody knows that the Bible is not preserved and corrupted. Even your own scholars say so. In under 1 minute, can you prove that the Bible is preserved?
First of all, I'm not your dimmy, so don't limit my time. I'll talk as long as I want. But, very simple question, has the Bible been corrupted? No, the Bible is the best preserved book of the ancient world. That's what scholars actually say, if you pay attention to what they're saying. Yes, there are textual variants. That's because we have so many manuscripts of the New Testament. The books spread very fast, very rapidly. If a scribe makes an error at some point, you can spot it because we have thousands of manuscripts to compare it to. So, the New Testament is the best preserved book of the ancient world. That's what I would say if I were talking to an atheist. If I were talking to a Muslim, I would say your God and your prophet affirm the inspiration and the preservation and the authority of the Jewish and Christian scriptures. And so if you say it's been corrupt, you're telling us that your God and your prophet were either completely ignorant or they were liars. Take your pick.
Ananda, you believe that Mary is the mother of God. How can it befit God's majesty to have a mother?
Well, we see in the incarnation that Christ assumed a human nature so he could do all things proper to as we did. He took it on not only to heal it, but to know us in a more intimate way, I suppose. And so we see that for his humanity, which is what we say in our tradition, there's one person, he does things either in his divinity or in his humanity. He had a mother via his humanity because he, as Galatians said, he was born under a woman under the law for our sake. It was for our salvation he came as us, on our nature, to heal our nature, to die in our nature, because in dying in our nature, human nature was freed from death. And so Mary being the mother of God is actually a very beautiful thing because it signifies that he was truly human. But being the mother of God signifies that this man who came to us was not just a man but God. And so it's not a sign of weakness, but I think it symbolizes the true love Christ had for us, that he came not just puffing out of thin air, which he could have done. God is all powerful. He could have just went and appeared. But he chose to have the full human experience. And so that doesn't make him weak, but that makes him loving, which is something, Allah doesn't do. Allah is prideful. He doesn't enter creation because he doesn't love his creatures. And pride is an emotion that was linked to hell in Islam. But in Christianity, God loves us. And so by loving us, he took on a mother to take on upon our nature in a way most like us. And that is why it doesn't make him weak, but very loving, very much greater than any other God.
Chris, from Speaker's Corner, thank you for joining us today. We understand you're one of the leading Christian evangelists at the corner. So we have brought you in to ask you some very difficult questions. To begin, if Allah slaps you, which hand did he use?
This is a very, very good question, and I can answer it not in 1 minute, not even 30 seconds. In 10 seconds, I can answer this question. It is clear. In the name of Allah, Wallahi, he says he has a right hand. He also has another right hand, sort of like this. But we know that when he talks about his right hand, it can be either hand. It depends on which one he wants to use in that moment. So wallahi, this is simple. I have answered this question in only 5 seconds. Praise be to Allah.
Dr. J. Smith, we know that the Quran is only one, perfectly preserved from the time of the Prophet up until today.
Word for word, letter for letter, dot for dot.
Oh boy, you guys, you have no idea what you're talking about. Do you know what today is? Today is June 8th. This is the one day you should not ask me that question. This is the day that Yasser Qadi and Muhammad Hijab had the same discussion about what you're just talking about, and they threw the Quran under the bus. You're saying the exact same, word for word, letter for letter, dot for dot. Have you looked at these two Qurans right here? Take a look at this one here. This is the Warish Quran in 812 it was written. This was the Hafs Quran in 796. This is the Quran you're reading today, but not if you're in North Africa, you'd be reading this Quran and you'd be memorizing it. Are these word for word, letter for letter? Just say yes or no. You don't even have any idea what I'm talking about. There are 5,000 different words between these two Qurans right here. So how can you say letter for letter, word for word? Obviously, you've not opened their pages. Now, these are just 2 of 30 that are official Qurans. You can get all of them. We have got them. Hatum Tash, only 5'2", was able to collect 26 of them in 2016, and we held them up at Speaker's Corner, and there was Muhammad Hijab standing right there filming us, realizing that there was a problem. He didn't know what to do about that, so he went 4 years later in 2020, on this date, this is the 4th anniversary for that, on this date, June 8, and asked him a very simple question. He put his hand out, and he said, Yasser Qadi, which is the real Quran? Which is this universal Quran? Which is the one that was revealed to Muhammad? Which is the one that Uthman actually wrote? He asked me, I'm giving you a blank slate. Please write. Which one are you going to put in there? Yasser Qadhi said, do not ask me this question. We don't talk about this in public. Turn off the camera. And then he says, this has been the most difficult question for the last 1,000 years. And he says, I did my doctorate in this in 1995. Oh, and Muhammad said, is that where you had a crisis of faith? No, a crisis of knowledge. But you Muslims who are asking this question, your standard narrative has holes in it. And the West is looking at us and looking at us Muslims as if the emperor with no clothes. This is Yasser Qadhi saying this. And now you're asking me, there's not one Quran that is different, not one word, not one letter. You need to look at that interview. This just happened 4 years ago, and you need to start looking at these two books right here, these two Qurans. This is just two. Look at the other 28. You want to know how many Qurans are in that other 28? How many differences there are? 93,000 different words. Go back and read your Quran again. Thank God we don't have that problem with the Bible. We don't even make this type of claim because we know that you do not, as Muslims, you don't even have one Quran that you've looked at that's the same. Even your manuscripts. Have you looked at the manuscripts? Have you looked at the Topkapi or the Samarkand or the Ma'il? Have you looked at the Petropolitanus? Have you looked at the Huzani manuscript? Have you even looked at the Sana'a manuscript? The best manuscript you've got. Have you looked at them? They're not even the same. 4,000 different consonantal differences. This has nothing to do with the dots and the vowels. These are consonantal differences, and you have the audacity to ask me whether or not they're the same. None of them are the same. Thank God we are doing our homework. You need to do your homework. Don't ask me that question again. Not in my presence. We're going to humiliate you on that.
I think this is very Islamophobic.
But Chris, many Islamic scholars say that the Qira'at and the Aruf are just accents.
Like potato.
Oh, okay. Do it, but not so funny.
But Chris, many Islamic scholars simply say that the Qira'at and the Aruf are just accents.
Like potato.
Well, you see, that's where you're wrong, because we know that there are two people, Umar and Hisham, who according to the Sunnah, which is authentic Sunnah, they actually disagreed on the Quran, on Surah Furqan, which is Surah 25, about precisely what that said, even though they both came from the same tribe of Quraysh, which tells us that this is not simply a case of dialects, this is actually something much more significant. They argued about what the Quran actually said.
Dr. David would you debate Ali Dawah?
I don't know anyone who wouldn't debate Ali Dawah. I've never seen him in an actual formal debate. I don't think any of us ever will. His arguments are garbage. He knows they're garbage. But if he were ever willing to actually have a formal debate on some important topic, let me just say here in advance, I will bring the grapes so his buddy, Smiles to Jenna, can grape him right in the mouth, satisfying all whatever fetishes cause him to do that kind of thing.
Anthony Rogers. I read the Bible from cover to cover. I did not see the word Bible in the Bible. How do you respond to this very difficult objection?
If you read the Bible cover to cover, then you should have seen the word Bible on the cover. That's where we put it. But that's just a term that we use to refer to this collection of books that God gave through the prophets. Unlike Islam, we believe in many books, and we call the collection of those books the Bible. So you don't need the term in the Bible for it to be an appropriate designation for that collection of books that we use as Christians.
Sikh.
Yes.
Jesus cannot be God because he went poo-poo. How do you explain this?
Okay. Okay, so Jesus cannot be God because he went to the bathroom. In what way does that logically follow? It's not an impossibility for God to take on a human nature and be able to do those things. Simply put, Jesus did every single natural biological function that is necessary to be a human being, include go to the bathroom. In no way does that diminish him from being God, because that has no effect on his divinity. The hypostasis of Christ in no way changed. I'll repeat that again. The person of Christ did not change because he became a person that went to the toilet. And in fact, this was something that was argued by people who wanted to say that Christ wasn't even a human being, the Docetists. They argued that Christ couldn't be a human being because becoming a human being would entail a change in God. The fathers of the church historically refuted this, demonstrating that actually God could, in fact, unite a human nature to himself without undergoing any sort of change. This question is frankly ridiculous, and anyone, and I mean anyone, that brings this specific argument up in any sort of fashion in no way is credible as a philosopher, as a theologian, and as a serious thinker. Thank you for your time.
Can you disprove the perfect preservation of the Quran in under 1 minute?
I could do it in just 30 seconds, and here we go. So that every Muslim believes that the Quran ultimately comes from the Uthmanic Codex. The problem is there's actually multiple Uthmanic Codex, so even from that point alone, they have variants in them, so that means the Quran is not perfectly preserved. Ibn al-Jazari canonized 10 different qira'at, which is another word for reading, which is what the Quran means, reading. Therefore, there are at least 10 Qurans according to al-Jazari. We can go further than that. We can actually say at some point there was even 14 ones. And if you look at the early Ummah, there was at least 25 different Qurans in use just after Muhammad died, which means that there are imams that were preaching Qurans that were not canonized and therefore not correct right after Muhammad. Therefore, the Quran is not perfectly preserved.
Excellent. Why are you stuttering? Why are you stuttering?